No one saw this coming. A young African soldier who once carried a rifle on dusty battlefields is now standing at the gates of history, nominated for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Ibrahim Traoré, Africa's youngest president, has shaken the world once again. It all began long before the cameras and headlines. Ibrahim Traoré was not born into wealth, nor groomed for high office. He was a soldier, one among many, marching in the dust of Burkina Faso's forgotten villages. His youth was shaped not by privilege, but by the echoes of war, hunger, and the cries of ordinary people who felt abandoned by their leaders. When militant groups struck fear into the countryside, Traoré stood at the front lines with his men, often fighting with limited resources, relying only on courage and determination. Those who served under him spoke of a leader who shared their meals, carried their burdens, and never left a soldier behind. But it was not just bravery that set him apart. It was his refusal to surrender his country's dignity. When the nation slid deeper into corruption and despair, Traoré rose, not for power, but for justice. At just 34 years old, he shocked the world by stepping into leadership, becoming the youngest president in Africa. Many scoffed at his age, calling him unprepared, but the people saw something different. A man who spoke their language, who lived their struggles, and who dared to say what others would not. That Africa's future would be decided by Africans, not dictated from foreign capitals. In his first months in power, he cut away at corruption, redirected resources to the poor, and placed national independence at the heart of his rule. His vision was bold, his style raw, but his people listened because he carried their pain with him. That moment, when a soldier became a symbol, marked the beginning of a journey no one could have predicted, a journey that would one day carry his name all the way to a Nobel Prize nomination. The news of Ibrahim Traoré's rise to power spread quickly beyond Burkina Faso, igniting conversations across Africa and even beyond the continent. In countries where people had grown tired of corruption, poverty, and foreign control, his name became a symbol of something fresh, something real. In the crowded markets of Lagos, traders debated his speeches while sipping tea, while in the streets of Nairobi, university students painted murals of his face with the words asterisk, Africa for Africans. Asterisk in Dakar, musicians began writing songs in his honor, calling him a leader who walked with the people instead of above them. What made Traoré different was not only his age, but the authenticity of his choices. He cut ties with exploitative deals, demanded fair trade, and placed education and security at the center of his mission. When global powers tried to pressure him with threats of sanctions or promises of aid, he stood firm, declaring that dignity could not be bought or sold. His defiance shocked the West and East alike, but it stirred pride in millions of Africans who had long wished for such courage. Even in Europe and America, young activists began to study his speeches, impressed by a voice so unapologetically rooted in justice. Meanwhile, back in Burkina Faso, ordinary citizens saw real changes. More support for farmers, more schools opening, and soldiers standing guard in villages once abandoned to chaos. Families who had once whispered fears at night began to sing songs of hope. The sense of unity spread like a wave, lifting the nation's spirit and inspiring neighboring countries to dream of their own transformations. For the first time in decades, the world was no longer laughing at the idea of African independence. They were beginning to take it seriously. As the momentum around Ibrahim Traoré grew, whispers of his possible nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize began to surface in international circles, sparking both excitement and controversy. In Ouagadougou, the people received the rumors with pride, seeing it as recognition of their struggle and resilience, while in Western capitals, politicians reacted with unease, questioning how a young African soldier who had defied global powers could be celebrated on such a stage. Yet undeniable facts supported the nomination. Under Traoré's leadership, violence in key regions had declined, communities once torn apart by fear were rebuilding schools and markets, and neighboring states were working together in a way unseen for decades. International journalists who once ignored Burkina Faso now flooded the country, interviewing farmers, students, and village leaders who spoke passionately about how their lives had begun to change. Critics pointed out that his government still faced challenges, shortages, threats from armed groups, and economic strain. But supporters argued that leadership was not about perfection, but about direction, and Traoré had given Africa a direction it had long been denied. In African universities, debates grew heated as students compared him to past revolutionary figures, wondering if history was repeating itself in their lifetime. Meanwhile, Nobel committees received letters from professors, human rights groups, and even former world leaders urging them to recognize not just Traoré, but the wider African struggle for dignity and sovereignty. For the young captain, however, the nomination was not about prizes or recognition. It was about sending a message that Africa's voice could no longer be silenced or ignored. And whether he won or not, the world had already been forced to listen, a victory in itself for millions who had once felt invisible. The official announcement of Ibrahim Traoré's Nobel Peace Prize nomination shook the world like thunder, igniting debates in every corner of the globe. In Paris, talk show hosts called it a provocation, while in Washington, politicians argued that recognizing Traoré would embolden other leaders to break free from Western influence. In Moscow, some officials grumbled that the young African president had already rejected their overtures, yet others quietly admitted his courage had earned global respect. But it was in Africa where the reaction hit deepest. From Dakar to Dar es Salaam, streets erupted with celebration, people waving Burkina Faso's flag as if the nomination itself was already a victory for the continent. Social media flooded with messages of solidarity. The hashtag Africa Rises trending for weeks as youth declared that Traoré's recognition was proof that Africa could chart its own destiny. Yet beneath the celebrations, tension grew. Foreign powers that once dismissed him now saw him as a dangerous symbol of defiance, and whispers of plots to destabilize his government multiplied. In Ouagadougou, Traoré addressed the nation with measured calm, reminding his people that the true prize was not a medal in Europe, but the unity and dignity they were building at home. Still, the weight of the moment could not be denied. Universities organized vigils, musicians composed songs in his honor, and even elderly villagers spoke of him as a son carrying Africa's dream into the world spotlight. As the Nobel Committee prepared to make its final decision, pressure mounted from all sides. Governments lobbied, newspapers speculated, and ordinary citizens prayed. For the first time in history, a young soldier from Burkina Faso had not only challenged the global order, but now stood on the brink of being immortalized as a global symbol of peace and African independence. The day of the Nobel Prize announcement arrived with a silence that felt heavier than any storm. Across Africa, radios crackled, televisions flickered, and millions held their breath as the committee chair in Oslo stepped onto the stage. For his unwavering commitment to peace, sovereignty, and the dignity of his people, the Nobel Peace Prize 2025 is awarded to Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. The words rang out like a thunderclap. In Ouagadougou, crowds exploded in joy, waving flags, dancing, and singing as church bells and mosque calls intertwined in celebration. Tears flowed freely in the faces of mothers who had once feared their sons would never see peace, and young people screamed Traoré's name as if they had won the prize themselves. Across the continent, fireworks lit the skies of Accra, Kinshasa, and Addis Ababa, turning the moment into a festival of African pride. But in the halls of power elsewhere, reactions were sharp. Western leaders expressed concerns, some calling it political, while Moscow remained cold, refusing to comment. Yet the world could not deny what had happened. Africa's youngest president had become a global symbol of defiance, peace, and hope. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré stood before his people, the medal hanging humbly around his neck. "This prize is not mine," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It belongs to Africa. It belongs to every farmer, every student, every mother, and every soldier who believes in our freedom." The roar of the people rose, so loud it shook the ground beneath their feet. In that moment, the world realized the truth. This was more than a Nobel Prize. It was the awakening of a continent, and Ibrahim Traoré had lit the fire that would never be put out. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message. Backend Index Pointing writes, subscribe now to Faso Histories for more powerful stories of Africa's rise and resilience.